Welcome to Sunday School Online for the week of July 12th. Today we're going to review. How many of you enjoy reviewing? It's kind of fun. You can see how much you remember from weeks past. So we're going to start way back with this picture. Do you remember what we talked about for this picture? Well, we talked about the human race. And remember what happened at the Tower of Babel? That's when people first moved and spread all over the earth. And now there are lots and lots of people all around the world. And we all look different. We have different hair, different eyes, but everyone's skin is actually brown. It's just maybe lighter or darker or somewhere in between. What makes our skin look brown? Do you remember? It's called melanin. But instead of just looking at how different we are, we should remember that God made us all alike. God made all people in His image, and we all came from the very first humans God ever created. Who were they? Adam and Eve. And there's another important thing that is the same for all people. The Bible tells us that we are all sinners, so we all need Jesus. Now we're going to flip the page. And I'll show you the next one that we talked about. Do you remember what this one's about? In this lesson, we saw that God is sovereign. Do you remember what sovereign means? It means that He's in control of everything. God is in control of everything, good and bad. We learned that God had blessed Job with a lot of animals, like donkeys, camels, and sheep, lots of servants, 10 children, and good health. You can see everything that God blessed him with. He was very happy. But just like God gives, He can also take away. And God took everything away from Job. What did Job do then? Did he still trust God, or did he turn away from God? He still trusted God. Job still trusted in God, and Job prayed to God when he lost his things. He knew that even when he didn't understand or like what was happening, he could still trust in God. We can trust God just like Job did. Whenever something good or bad happens, we can pray to God and praise Him, or we can ask Him for help because He is a good and loving God. Who can tell me again what the word is that means God is the one who's in control of everything? Sovereign. That's right. So we're going to move on to the next lesson. Okay. Do you remember what this one was all about? Well, we started to talk about a man named Abram. And Abram had faith in God, and his faith helped him obey God. Abram lived in a place where many people worshipped false gods. God didn't want Abram to stay there, so He told him to do something. What was it? That's right, to move away to a place that God would show him. Abram packed up all of his things, took his wife and his nephew Lot, and left his home. Even though he didn't know where God was leading him, Abram trusted God that He would have a very good plan for him. Abram also believed that God would take him to heaven someday. And if we put our faith in God and trust in His Son, Jesus, to save us from our sins, someday we will be with Jesus in heaven forever. Next we're going to move on to the next one. Do you remember this one? Who's in this picture? Abram and Lot. So do you remember Lot? He was Abram's nephew. Lot made a bad choice that led to some big trouble. Abram and Lot were traveling together, but they both had a lot of possessions and animals. When their servants started fighting, Abram decided that he and Lot should separate from each other. So Abram let Lot choose the land he wanted for himself. How did Lot decide which land he wanted? He chose the land that looked the best, right? It was green and lush. Lot chose the nicest looking place, and that's where he went. But that meant he had to live right next to a wicked city, a place called Sodom, where he was captured in a battle. Abram came to his rescue and brought Lot and all the people and stolen goods back. And even though the king of Sodom told Abram that he could keep all of the nice things for himself, Abram did not accept anything from such a wicked man. Instead, Abram chose to show his love and thankfulness for God by giving some of the things as gifts to the priest Melchizedek. When we choose things just because they look good or feel right or seem fun, we can get into trouble, just like Lot did. So whenever you have a choice to make, think about what God would want you to do and ask God to help you make the right choice. So let's turn our page again. All right, do you remember this one? Well, in our next lesson, we learned that one important thing about God is that He has to judge sins. He can't just let it go. Sodom and Gomorrah were cities full of wicked, sinful people, and God had to punish them for their sins. What did God do to these cities? Can you see in the picture? He sent fire and sulfur to destroy them. The cities were totally destroyed, and as a punishment for their sins. But we also saw that God showed mercy on Lot, Abraham's nephew. And there's Lot. Who did God send to rescue Lot and his family? 2 angels. The angels took Lot's family out of the city and told them to hurry to safety and to not look back. They did get to a safe place, but Lot's wife disobeyed the angel's command, and she looked back. Do you remember what happened to her? She turned into a pillar of salt. She was punished for her disobedience. God must be obeyed. So next we're going to move on to the next picture. Do you remember this one? Do you remember what a covenant is? It's a serious promise. God made a covenant with Abram, right here. He promised that Abram would have so many descendants that he wouldn't be able to count them all, just like the stars in the sky. Abram believed God. He had faith that he would have a son and many descendants would come after him. But as time passed, Abram and Sarai grew tired of waiting and decided to help God with his promise. They decided that Abram should have a child with Sarai's servant Hagar. What was the name of Hagar's son? Ishmael. Sarai and Abram thought that God would use Ishmael to fulfill his promises, but it only caused problems in their family. It was wrong for them to be impatient and to try to help God. It is easy for us to get impatient while we're waiting for something that's been promised to us, especially when it seems like it's taking a long time. But we need to make sure to wait for God, to do the things in His time and not in ours. God is faithful. That means we can trust him completely to do what he says he will do. We're moving right along to the next one. So with this picture here, 13 years later, God reminded Abram of his promise that he made to him. Then God changed his name from Abram to Abraham, and he changed Sarai's name to Sarah. Then God told Abraham that he and Sarah would have a child at a set time the very next year. Even though they were very old, a year later, God gave Abraham and Sarah a son at the exact time he had promised. Isaac was the special child born to Sarah and Abraham in their old age. Do you remember how old Sarah was when Isaac was born? 90 years old. And do you remember how old Abraham was? He was 100. Do you know anyone who's that old? I think I just know my great aunt. She might be 102. So we're going to flip the page. We'll keep the book on the stand there. And let's see, this one is oops, sorry, I lost my spot here. Okay, so this picture, can you see there's kind of a glare there? This was an exciting lesson that we had. We learned about a test that God gave to Abraham. God told him to take his son Isaac and offer him as a sacrifice. This was a really hard test. Abraham had waited so long for a son, and now God wanted him to put his son on the altar and kill him just like he would with a lamb for a sacrifice. So what did Abraham do? Did he obey, or did he say, "No way"? He obeyed. Yes, Abraham took Isaac and put him on the altar, and as he was standing over his son with the knife, ready to obey God, what happened next? If you said the angel of the Lord spoke, God said to stop it, you're right. God stopped Abraham. He had passed the test. Abraham showed that God was more important to him than even his son Isaac. But a sacrifice still needed to be made. So what did God provide so Isaac didn't have to die? A ram. God was giving us a picture of someone else who would be a sacrifice many years later. God would send someone to be a substitute for sinners. Do you remember who that was? Jesus. Jesus is our substitute. God sent his son Jesus to die so that we can live, just like the ram died so that Isaac could live. Those who put their trust in Jesus can live with him in heaven forever. So we're going to turn the page one more time. And this was last week, so you should remember this one. When Isaac was 40 years old, his father Abraham sent a servant on a mission to find a bride for Isaac. The servant traveled 500 miles back to the place where Abraham's relatives lived. Did the servant know who the right woman was? No, he didn't. So he couldn't just go up to her house and knock on the door. He had no idea who the woman was who God chose for Isaac. So what did he do when he got into town? He prayed. The servant knew he couldn't do this job alone. So the servant began to pray that God would show him the right woman. She would be the one who would do something very different than the others. What would the woman do? Do you remember? The servant would ask a woman for a drink of water. And if she said, "I will give your camels a drink," then he would know that she was the one he was looking for. Before the servant even finished his prayer, a young lady named Rebecca came to the well. She gave him a drink and watered all of his camels. She was the one for Isaac. The servant really trusted that God is sovereign. God is in control of everything. Well, very good. I hope you enjoyed our review for the last, I believe, 9 lessons. So good job. And we'll wait to see what we're going to study next week. So bye for now.